In this video, I'm going to explain how to make the graph for your Pendulum lab. So when you open the document from Google Sheets, you'll see a table just like this. You'll notice that I've already input all of my data from the lab, and this is just like the data that you have recorded on the paper already. One thing to be careful of here is that all of these numbers do not have units on them. So I make sure that the units are on the top of my table, but I do not want any units typed into these cells. Otherwise, our graph won't work when Google tries to make it. Another thing to make sure is that right here in this cell, I need to replace the words that started there with just the name of my independent variable. So for this example, I'm going to use mass as my independent variable. You need to make sure that you type whatever it was that your group was measuring. The next thing you want to do is in these yellow boxes, we're going to type formulas that allow Google to do the math for you so you don't have to type all the numbers into your calculator. So first, in this column, we're going to make Google calculate the average for us. So what I want to do is use just this text right here. That is the formula that tells Google to calculate the average. So I'm going to get rid of the rest of the text in that box. So it just says equals average of B3 colon B3. So the equals sign is how you tell Google that you want it to do calculations. And then it knows how to take an average. And then this B3 to D3 is telling it to take the average of these three cells, because it's row B or column B, row 3, over to column D, row 3. So those three numbers, we're taking the average. And when I press enter, you'll see that that calculation appears automatically. In this next column, we want to calculate the period. So remember that when you were gathering your data, you waited for the pendulum to swing back and forth 4 full times. But the period is the amount of time it takes to swing back and forth just once. So we have to take the average measurement in seconds and just divide that by 4 to get how many seconds it would take to swing just once. So once again, in this box, I'm going to take what was already written and just get rid of everything except within the quotation marks. So now I've got equals, tell Google that it's doing a calculation, E3, because that's this cell right here where I have the average, and then divided by 4. And when I press enter, that calculation will show up automatically as well. Now, in the rest of these yellow cells, what I want is to do those same calculations, except I want, instead of referencing the numbers here in row 3, like for this average, I want to reference the numbers in row 4. And for the next average, I'm going to want to reference the numbers in row 5. So I could go in and I could type this formula over and over and just replace the 3 with a 4 and then a 5 and so on. But a much faster way to do that is to make Google copy it for me. So the way to do that is I'm going to select both of these cells, and then I'm going to notice this little square in the bottom corner. And when I click on that and then drag my mouse down while holding the mouse button, and then when I let go, Google is going to copy these cells down into the other rows, but also notice how the formulas have changed. It automatically updated which row it was referencing. So now I have all of my calculations done. The next thing I need to do is make a graph. So for my graph, I want to graph the period of the pendulum versus the mass that was at the bottom of it. So all of these other numbers in the middle, I don't need those in my graph. I just want column F and column A. So the way I'm going to do that, I'm going to select these cells in column A just by clicking and dragging my mouse. And then in order to also select column F, I'm going to press down Control on my keyboard and hold it while selecting these cells. So now that I have the two sets of cells that I want graphed selected, I'm going to click this shortcut that says Insert Chart. I can also do that from the menu over here. I can go Insert and then a chart. And sometimes it takes a second to load, so you can just be patient, but then you'll see that a graph will pop up in 1 second. Okay, so now I have this graph, and Google guessed that I wanted a bar graph, but it's wrong. So I actually want to make a scatter plot in this case. And over here, I have all the different settings for the graph that I can change because Google's settings aren't the ones that I want. So I'm going to start right here with a chart type. I'm going to click down and scroll until I find a scatter chart. So now I have the right type of graph, but there's still a lot of settings that I need to fix because my axes aren't labeled and my title isn't what I really want it to be. And I don't need this legend over here. And I'm also going to add error bars to my data points. So in order to do all of those different things, I'm going to go over here to the Customize tab. And then here are where all the different settings are, and I'm going to expand each one to make the settings that I want. So first of all, the title of my graph, what's up here, I always want the title to say the name of the variable on the y-axis versus the name of the variable on the x-axis. So in this case, the period of the pendulum is on the y-axis. So I'm going to type period versus mass is on the x-axis. And then I'll add a little more detail to my title to make it more descriptive. I'll say period versus mass for a pendulum. Now the title of my graph is good, but I can also put my axes titles in these same settings right here, and I need those as well because right now my axes aren't labeled. So I'm going to change this to the horizontal axis title, and on my horizontal axis I have the mass, and then I'm going to make sure that in parentheses I write the units that I measured mass in, which in my case was grams, so G for grams. Then I'm going to go also to the vertical axis title, and I'm going to put that label in, which was the period, and I measured that in seconds. So I write the units of S in parentheses. Those are all my settings for the titles. Then in this next section, series, that's how I can change things about these data points on my graph. So I mentioned before that I want error bars, right? Because we talked about how we're going to communicate the amount of error in our measurement, and the way we do that on the graph is right here by putting in error bars. And then the type of error bars I want is not percent. I'm going to change that to constant. And then in this case, the value for them is going to be 0.2, because we talked about how with measurement, like timing error, with stopwatches, you have an error of about 0.2 seconds on your data points. So I'm done with those settings under series. The next settings are the legend. And all I want to do here is I'm going to change the position. Instead of having the legend on the right, I'm actually just going to get rid of it because I'm only plotting one set of data. I only have one set of data points. I don't really need a legend in this graph. The next thing I'm going to change on the horizontal axis, notice right here on this graph that I don't see like a 0 at the very beginning. I want to make sure that my axes always start at 0, both the horizontal axis and the vertical axis. So under my horizontal axis settings over here, I see minimum, and I'm going to just type in the minimum value 0. For maximum, I don't have to type anything because the graph already chose a maximum value that's perfectly reasonable. There's no reason I need to change that. So then I'm going to do the same thing for the vertical axis because over here it's not starting at 0 right now, but I need it to. So I'm going to go to the minimum and I'm going to hit 0 again. And now that I look at my graph, it has everything that I need it to have. I have labels on both axes and a title. I have all my data points with error bars on them, and my axes start at 0. So this graph is all done now.